Yes, we're not on Carolina time, right? This is no nonsense. So welcome to the last panel. My name is Sarah Dempsey. I'm a faculty member in communications studies here at UNC Chapel Hill. My sole role right now is to really just share a sense of congratulations, thankfulness, and just really awe in terms of the organizing committee that has put together this fabulous conference. And so, the organizing committee includes Armond, Alex Ingersoll, and please stand up for Alex, Amy, Jessica Rich, Jen Cronin, and Dana DeSoto. And I want to give a special thank you with sincere appreciation to Armond and all the work that you have done in terms of your leadership and just the care by which it's evident that this conference has been put together. So very good job. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to our 4 panelists to begin.
Okay, I guess I'll start it off. So I want to thank you all for coming. You know, we were kind of wondering how this was going to unfold, and it's actually unfolded a lot smoother than we thought. And I also want to thank the other people who have helped me, Alex and Amy and Jessica and the others who aren't here, because everybody like sees me, but these people are also behind doing a lot of work. So I really, really appreciate them. And of course, the people who have decided to moderate our panels, we are also very appreciative of you as well. So I want to kind of give a basic kind of overview of why we did this, kind of like our goals and our aspirations for why we decided to put this together. We are all very, very different scholars. I study race and media, and Alex studies media and technology. Dana studies the economy, right? Amy looks at space, and Jessica or Tom, right? So we kind of brought together all these various different positions just to start thinking about our conference theme, which we had no idea what we were going to do, but felt that that would be a good way to try to speak to various different ideas that communication addresses, but also to keep in mind interdisciplinary aspects, right? So we kind of hope that that would be kind of what came out of this conference. And I think for the most part that kind of, at least for me, it has that kind of feel to it. So our goal was to speak to interdisciplinarity, but also to provide networking opportunities so that we could meet different people in the area from outside the area and just have a large conversation. And we came to the concept of equality largely just through multiple conversations, right? We sat down with each other, and at some point we kind of, I think we all said, to some extent we can all kind of speak to equality or some notion or critique it in some way in our own research, right? So just a small background, I guess, on my own research. I'm studying a street gang tour in South Central Los Angeles, and the tour drives through, it's basically ran by gang members in the neighborhood, and they drive through South Central, they take a bus full of middle-class white people through South Central, and they give them a history of gangs and culture in South Central. And the tour basically only talks about, well, not only, but the majority of the tour only talks about black gangs and black relations in South Central. Does anybody know anything about South Central at all? South Central is currently a 65% Chicano neighborhood. So it's a very interesting kind of omission. And I kind of, think about that in terms of why, right? Like equal concepts of representation, if you want to call it that, right? like that may have been like my end, right? And we all have different ends, right, based on our research interests. So that was kind of, you know, my thinking about equality. And, you know, you can talk to everybody else individually and see what their thinking on equality and inequality are. So that was kind of how we came up with this idea of an equality conference and kind of our goals, right? Interdisciplinarity, networking, and basically we all kind of see, to some extent, questions of equality or questioning the conception of equality probably more accurately in our own work. So. And I guess I will kind of turn it over to our faculty.
Okay, you just want to go in this direction? Sure. Okay. I also want to thank everybody who was involved in making the conference possible and for inviting me. And in a sense, I feel like I shouldn't speak very much now since you got to hear from me a lot yesterday. But I think there were some themes in the conference that I was picking up on and tried to cluster together. So I'll probably only get through a couple of these things. But the first one is about what is equality, right? And there's one kind of a standard definition of equality that is something like measurable sameness, right? In one trait or aspect or another. But I think that sameness, you know, according to some dominant imperative or norm, is only a tiny fraction of what one can mean when talking about equality. And for me, in terms of criteria for equality, I said this some last night, that there are multiple versions of that. One is sort of a liberal one. One is one of recognition or equality of recognition. One is an equality of distribution or redistribution. And there are kinds of equalities like, I was thinking about solidaristic equality where, I meant to say this last night, but my friend Tiffany, the activist, she said, rather than having the slogan be strength and unity, that the slogan was unity and strength. And the difference between that is that there's no necessary sameness in terms of coalition building or activism, that what you have together, what you share with each other is agency and the will to carry out certain kinds of actions. And I thought that said a lot. And so that was one kind of, so a definitional kind of moment that was happening in different ways all over the place. The second cluster then had to do with agency and social movements. I mean, clearly we've been talking about that across different media and different kinds of situations. And I really am drawn, and I wanted to mention this to you, to Nancy Fraser's work. She has a number of excellent articles. She's a feminist, social theorist. She has written a lot in feminist public sphere theory, but she has this book called Justice Interruptus. And she does this really cool thing where she says there are two kinds of justice. There's a recognition and there's redistribution. And she said it's a tendency of people who are debating these things to, you know, sort of go all in and defend one side of that in a really hard way. And so you can hear me talk about redistribution as really sort of a baseline for me of like, you know, does it get us stuff? That's really important to me because I noticed that inequality manifests itself in differentials in resources that have tremendous effects on people's lives or deaths and quality of life, right? But she said, well, so that we should see it dialectically instead, that the culture work, that the recognition work of oppressed, marginalized, or subaltern collectivities is important in dialectical relationship to the redistributive project. And so she talks about deconstruction in the humanities and theory building and culture work as part of a dialectical, mutually influencing kind of process by which an agency dedicated to equality can emerge. And I just think that whenever I'm really super tempted to say, bah, on culture and discourse, first of all, I have to remember I'm a rhetorician. Secondly, then I think about Nancy Fraser. But it does also bring me to another cluster of terms about materialism and realism, because these were terms that were going around. I spent a lot of my career defending sort of the Marxist tradition in the discipline, kind of keeping the door slightly open so that my students and I can enter it periodically. And so I think it's really important to make a distinction between materialism and realism. That to say something is real, that can encompass an enormous range of things, including all the discourses, including all the culture, including consciousness, including whatever. And as a materialist, when I say materialism, I'm talking about sort of the concrete way that the goods and resources of society are created and organized and distributed, right? So that's a very classical way of seeing it, but oftentimes when I say I'm concerned about the material, they think, you think ideas don't matter, and so then people come along and invent a new materialism, which I'm like, you don't need to invent a new materialism. All that was real. I mean, so everything matters, right? And so there's a body materialism and so on, but I really want to ask people to think specifically about materialism in terms of this stuff. And that gets brought up in some of our acknowledgement over the weekend about the limits of an entirely discourse-driven cultural intervention method. I mean, about the limits of the mass media, the limits of the internet, also the possibilities. And a lot of questions were raised for me about outsider roles in starting projects, the Row House project, now I'm having trouble thinking of things, but I mean, but a number of other things where intellectuals make an intervention in a scene in order to prompt some agency and activism. And I'm wondering, could we talk more deeply about our role and what we enable and what we disable, especially for me, again, this is just me, the aestheticization of politics in the way that I'm concerned about. That is non-dialectical, that basically puts all the emphasis there and doesn't actually engage some of the other things. And gosh, I really think that, I mean, and this is sort of the last thing I'll talk about, it seems to me that in the conference that there's been some conversation about race, but not a lot about race. I feel like that when we're talking about equality, justice, and social movement, I think many people still find it difficult to broach subjects so really at the core of the question in a courageous way. I think Alex did a really good job in just basically sticking out there. And I really think that that's excellent. And I think also thinking about what Margot was talking about diversity and inclusion as ideals in the university setting, where it's always used as sort of the business and the neoliberal model to, and so we're not allowed at the University of Texas to ever talk about redress, about even recognition or redistribution in terms of admissions to the university. We have to only talk about it being important to admit minorities because of some good called diversity, which is an amorphous good, and which I think is beside the point. So I got visited, because I'm the director of grad studies in my program, I got visited by the legal team in the president's office because somehow they heard that I was talking about redress of historical injustice, and they're like, you can't do that. And I realize there are legal reasons that I can't do that. Now the Fisher case is coming up, and all of the argument is about diversity, and none of it is about justice. And I'm not the only one who's frustrated by that. But I think that actually gets at what I was saying first, which is about diversity being sort of a discourse, you know, and justice being something with some ground to it. And so that's where I'll start.
I want to frame my remarks on my experience at a conference. I sort of talked my way into this under slightly false pretenses. When I saw the call, I was very interested in the topic because it's right at the heart of my own research agenda. And I've been feeling stuck. And I thought, if I go to the conference, it'll be, you know, I got myself invited so I could talk my dean into funding me because it's the only conference I've done this year. I could see old friends, a couple of old friends, including Dr. Sarah. And, right, so that's like, oh, it sounds like a junket, right? But I knew that if I came here, people would say, what are you working on? Because that's what happens at these things. And so I wanted to, and I have sort of a soft spot for student-run, managed conferences, because I had to do one myself in the old days. And so I really wanted to sort of open my remarks by commenting on the significance of this kind of gathering for being able to sustain an intellectual life. So, I mean, the faculty already know this, and if you've been around in the doctoral program for a while, you're probably getting a good inkling. But it's really, even the conversation outside of the room are as important as anything that goes on inside of the room. And so I came to sort of expose myself.
Not in a creepy way.
Not in a creepy way. To try to open myself up to having to answer the question, what are you working on? Because I've been feeling like I've been going around in circles, doing a lot of description. I'm trying to write a book on ideology, and I'm trying to write a book on treating ideology in a functional way of looking at what are the things people believe about the nature of the world, about human nature, about how economies ought to operate, about how political systems ought to operate. So it's a big bite, right? And I'm not going to start talking about that now because you won't be able to shut me up if I do. But most of what I've been doing has been descriptive. And I thought, what's the point? What am I trying to get at? And so I had several conversations already, and I got to interest/bore Dr. Balthrop and Dr. Dana last night at dinner when they asked me what I was working on. And that was about the third time I had to talk about it at the conference. And when we were driving home, as I was driving home, I realized, it was like the little light bulb went on. I realized, oh, I know what my point is. Right? And it's the place where I ended my earlier book. It's sort of, my earlier book was about how economic theories of typically Adam Smith and Milton Friedman, classical liberal theories, work to reconfigure the way we saw justice, with the result that, as Dana was talking about in her talk, that struggle between freedom and equality is right at the root of liberalism. You know, go all the way back to John Locke, you start reading the second treatise, and what you see is the very first thing he opens with is a discussion of liberty. I'm sorry, it's a discussion of equality, and he uses equality to then move to liberty. And liberty becomes the basis for all his recommendations about how government should work. And as I revisited that, and I thought, wait a minute, what happened to equality? It kind of disappears, like it evaporates. And so the place that I came to, I'm not going to try to recapitulate the argument of that book either, but the point that I ended at, the thesis that I've developed, is that reconfiguration of justice has turned our view of justice into the view of justice as exchange. And that where people's position in society is, where people stand in relation to each other, got moved out of the topic of justice entirely and became sort of a matter of, well, that's a private life. That's sort of personal business. That's not something we can talk about as a public matter. And that created, in my book, I say what it did is it threw the question of recognition onto decorum. And that decorum wasn't able to bear the weight of doing justice. So the light bulb moment I had was I recaptured what I ended that first book with, which is the problem that comes from that, is that people can have a tremendously hard time feeling like they belong, of knowing where they stand in relation to other people. And particularly in a social sort of circumstance where people are divided by unequal wealth, different kinds of advantages, things like that, those can become totally naturalized and taken as if, well, that's just how the world is. And so some people do belong. Some people are privileged and sort of like, well, that's life. That was the point that I got to, and then I realized, the reason why I want to talk about ideology is because I want to talk about how ideology functions in a rhetorical way to help people feel like they belong. Right? So thank you all for the opportunity for me to come and sort of stick my neck out. And I wanted to encourage that. And that's why I wanted to comment on the conference like this kind of experience is the thing that really helps keep an intellectual life alive. So this is not like a job that you're being trained to do, where you sort of operate some really complex piece of theory as if it's a machine. It's about the difficulty of going for something you think is a really important idea, a really important insight, an important problem that you see, and the habits of thought that people have, and deciding that you really need to find it and articulate it and get it out there. And it's a tremendously satisfying feeling when you are able to do it, and it's a tremendously kind of scary prospect while you feel like you're going around in circles and will never get there. And the interaction with other people is invaluable for that. Even if the idea was already in my head, it was like it was locked in a closet somewhere, and I had to go fumbling around until I tripped over it again. So, for me, that let's call it the historical value of the appearance of equality as a political principle, and then subsequently its advocacy as a social principle, and then as an economic principle, that the value of that is the idea that, which I think is present in some earlier versions, is that everybody belongs. So everybody's equal in this, or equality means that people do belong. And one of the ways I kind of connect that to an even older way of thinking about equality is that sort of go back centuries, and what we were equal, despite a feudal arrangement, or even before that, ancient or classical times, is everybody was equal in the sight of God. Everybody's souls were equal. The gods saw that we were all human beings. We were all persons with able to make moral choices and things like that. And that's a kind of belonging that I think that's the kind of belonging that I think got cut off or transformed or deformed, I should say, with this shift in the way we think about justice. So that's so this insight that I recaptured, that was the driving motivation for the work that I'm trying to do. I wanted to say there's a kind of equality that happens in conferences like this, and to make it clear to all the students here, you belong, and this is one of the ways you belong.
Great. Well, Paul, I want to second what you said about the importance of this gathering by offering an example of how you inspired me. You ready for this? Okay. Well, you were talking about drugs in the 60s. Okay, that doesn't mean I'm going to go out and do drugs, but here's what you said. I think this is what you were talking about in response to Brett's presentation. You said that there was something, or it was something around alternative ways of imagining consciousness. And that's what you said, that was kind of what you were in, everybody laughed. But I'm going to use that as a jumping off point for where we need to be, where I think we need to be in terms of thinking about something called equality. That, we have lots of different ways that we're coming at that. And so I think that provides us with one tool. And especially if we start in the discursive space that we create, when we start to think about the multiplicities. And I think this is something that has been coming up earlier. Allison, in your comments, you talked about, you saw this sort of going from the specific to the general. And I would say that in that general place, that really we're talking about the multiplicity, that all of us, are entangled. So even when you talk about this notion of belonging, I would think about that discursively as we are, whether we want to be or not, entangled in this enterprise that we're calling the social. Let's call it that for the moment. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with, what would it look like if we were to think about engaging this question of well, how do we engage the multiplicity? The multiplicities of being and doing. And I'm taking this from, I want to start with one line from a proposal that that's under consideration at UNC Press based on my work, which is that when we think about this discursive space, we're looking for the infinite discursive practices that situate the range of possible ways of thinking and doing. All right, so how is it that, if we start there, what do we start to think about in terms of equality? And so in my work, I have been thinking about equality in a way that is embedded in collective organizing. So when you think about bringing together elite universities and people living in vulnerable situations and students who are at these elite universities and the adult allies of young people who live in communities, what if we introduce this idea of partnership, and we're very serious about creating something like partnership? So that's the space where I interrogate equality every day in terms of looking at this project. So I'm actually going to read some excerpts of this proposal that I submitted to UNC Press, and they've told me that they're very impressed with it, and so I'll take that as a nice affirmation. But this is a work in progress, but it's a work based on work that I've been doing for the last 5 years. So I want to start by reading an excerpt from the introduction. The name of the book that I'm proposing is Ella's Daughters, Youth Social Justice Leadership in the Era of the New Jim Crow. Ella's Daughters is about the possibilities and realities of social justice leadership by African American girls, like some of the ones that I work with, and I quoted a girl that I call Jamila, who live in under-resourced, segregated, subsidized housing. It is about the potential for youth activism under the tight surveillance of mass incarceration tactics that reach into neighborhoods and schools, strict housing policies that threaten basic security, and other forms of street-level systems of control that constitute a new Jim Crow era in the United States. Now, I borrowed this phrase of the new Jim Crow from the very popular, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And she makes a compelling case that the systems of legal segregation and openly racist control tactics, which persisted from Reconstruction through the 1950s in the United States, exist now as the new caste arrangement created by systems of mass incarceration, targeting primarily youth of color and sustained by subtle systemic racism. It was she, Michelle Alexander, who popularized the term the new Jim Crow. Others, have described these structured systems of oppression and the social psychological forces that keep them in place in different ways. For example, Iris Marion Young writes about the bird cage metaphor to explain structural racism. Stanley Cohen has described in his book States of Denial the personal and political ways uncomfortable realities are avoided and evaded. And I think, again, this is what you're talking about when you said, we don't know how to belong together. How do we talk to each other about how we fit in this social discursive space that we've created? And then one last example in terms of thinking about this notion of the new Jim Crow. Steve Herbert writes in his book, Banish, that many U.S. cities employ social control tools, such as gang injunctions, no contact laws. There are actually laws that are called no contact laws, or simply banning people from being within a specified target area, fusing civil and criminal law to accomplish spatial exclusion. These and other sources I'm using in my book to explain and theorize a particular moment that is catalyzing a response, though perhaps fragmented and not clearly identified as a movement, but nevertheless a moment pregnant with possibilities for inspired youth leadership. And so this is what I am hoping to work through in the book based on work that I've been working through in my own life as I've been doing this action research. So this book is about the limits and possibilities of my role as an African-American woman, university researcher, feminist, activist, working and learning with girls and their allies to create social justice, some sort of social justice leadership project. It's about the narratives that politicize particular spaces, producing negative labels that stick to identities as young people go to school, to work, and to play. It's about how young people interpret the complicated reality of seeing the kind of adulthood their parents live, their struggles to survive, their hope for a better life, and how this informs young people's choices about civic activism and other forms of agency. Ella's Daughters is about the legacy and continued significance of Black women and girls' leadership in the ongoing struggle for equality, a kind of leadership that is often hidden and improvisational, a way of life that is not a national movement, but that is revealing of what is possible. So that's the introduction, and it sort of situates what I'm doing, what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And so I also want to, let me jump to another space here to talk about what I see as some of the tensions as we're trying to think about the partnership that we have. So first I want to talk about this idea of the title of the book, Ella's Daughters. This work is really in a tradition of there's a plethora of centers, of institutes, programs throughout the world that reflect the influence of Ella Baker, who has been an inspiration to me in terms of doing this work. And they're all over the world. There are institute centers and so forth that reflect her radical vision of democracy. It's a vision of grassroots organizing, of critical feminism. There's a UNC Press published an award-winning biography of Ella Baker in which, from Barbara Ransby, created, she herself, Barbara Ransby, who's at the University of Chicago, created an international network of activists, scholars, writers, parents, and supporters who are interested and already engaged in work that represents a continuation of Ella Baker's democratic, egalitarian, humanistic traditions. And she named her network Ella's Daughters. And in 2008, members of the youth group that we formed together in our collective traveled, one of the moms came with us. We took a field trip to a gathering of Ella's Daughters at the University of Illinois Chicago. And Professor Ransby welcomed us as sort of the southern arm of, and even though Ella Baker was born in, I spent part of her childhood in North Carolina and graduated in 1928 from Shaw University, valedictorian. And it was there when she convened the conference that would create SNCC. And it was she who was the reason that SNCC exists and not was, sort of an arm of the civil rights movement. But at any rate, we went to Chicago, and these young women, some of them traveled for the first time on a plane, were the only high school activists at this gathering, and they boldly stepped into their roles as carriers of Ella's tradition of leadership. So just to give you some legacy and history of this work and how we're doing it. So, so there are, can you tell me how I'm on time?
You are fabulous on time.
Okay.
So you have 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. So I do want to get to the part where we talk about our collective. So, so I'm looking at 2 interdisciplinary areas of scholarship to situate this work that can explain sort of how the collective is developed. The first is critical youth studies, and the other is activist scholarship. And just briefly, critical youth studies is this interdisciplinary area that crosses so many disciplines: urban education, social policy, anthropology, social work, communication and cultural studies, of course, women's studies, political science. But it's tapping into this, people are calling it the movement of movements, the youthscapes. There's a great book called Youthscapes, where young people are stepping into their identities as activists. And I want to put that in conversation with what Sari talked about in her talk, so we can talk more about that. Sometimes this is called, hip-hop, the hip-hop generation, immigrant youth, LGBTQ youth, and so spanning all of this. But there are lots of books that are coming out that are accessible, and my book is going to be entering into that conversation. And then the other place that my book is well, let me just say something about this notion of activist identities. The central question that Ella's Daughters interrogates is this question: what compels or not African American teenage girls, because that's the young people I've been engaging for the last 5 years, what compels or not African American teenage girls to see activism as a way forward? What narratives do they construct about whether and how they see themselves as activists with agency? What are the symbolic and discursive resources that inform these narratives? And these are questions that they're not answered in one easy answer. And so this is sort of all tied up in the way that we're telling that story. So the other literature that I'm looking at is activist scholarship. And so I want to call attention to one woman that I hope is going to be a reader for my book, actually, Julia Sudbury, who has written this volume, Activist Scholarship, and this is how she defines activist scholarship. By using the term activist scholarship, we resist the tendency to separate out the 2 terms. As if academics carry out activist work on the side, she has quotes, outside of their scholarly work. Instead, we understand activist scholarship as a model of active engagement between the academy and movements for social justice. And so part of this book is about me. It's about my personal search of a way of doing activist research as a starting point, and to illuminate some of the tensions and questions, such as how can one become a scholar and an activist? What about questions of power? Is it really possible? I don't have all those reallys in there. Is it really possible for power elites to partner with people in vulnerable communities? Is the goal to partner in some egalitarian sense, or is the aim to raise consciousness and educate in the tradition of critical pedagogy and other critical methodologies? What about publishing? Whose voice gets privileged? So all of these are questions that I'm interrogating, but I'm also interrogating this space of these entanglements, right, of how we belong together in this project. And so now I want to just say who the people are on the university side. My students, my undergraduate students, I created a first-year seminar in which the students are engaging young people in communities, including some of them partnering with the young people that I work with, but they also engage others. And then we have a model that is a critical pedagogical model that I teach. One underlying, sort of catchphrase that we use is that when we're engaging people, we're going for solidarity, not charity. So young people coming in with, and I love the way, sort of, Sarah, you sort of complicated that space where they might be thinking about themselves as activists. But I messed that up. Totally mess it up for them, right, in terms of hopefully mess that up, in terms of thinking more critically. It's not your job to save the world. Thank goodness, right? And we can learn to work in solidarity, but it's still a little more complicated than that. So looking at some of those entanglements, and there's one book, and maybe you're familiar with this book, Nina Eliassoff's book, Making Volunteers, Civic Life After Welfare's End. And she does a good job of making the case for looking at these tensions. And I see that the primary tension is this one. The primary tension is the one between the adverse, right now, material conditions that vulnerable youth face, the structure, which that is the structural context of poverty, racism, sexism, homophobia. So the right now in your face material conditions, that's on the one side, and we're thinking about this dialectically. And then this notion of the potential of a happier future, right? That's the save the world part. If they just would show up on time, and if we can just get them to do the right things, and then there's all this potential, and there's inequality in that way, so we're going to erase all those obstacles, and then here you go. There's a tension there in terms of some of the typical quote-unquote programs that engage youth. And so we're interrogating that space. What does that look like to really think about those tensions that are happening there? And so I will conclude by saying that the project that we're working on is different from other projects because a lot of people write about this after the fact. And I'm writing about while I'm still in it, and we had this question at the very beginning. We messed up so terribly in so many ways, and we got so many things right also, and it's, the conversation is not, sort of cut and dry. So I see equality as necessarily a project of engaging multiplicities. That's it.
All right, so questions. I can just call on people to start. We'll see how that goes. Do you want to start?
Yes, especially bringing up the idea of activists and scholars, whether it's participating in social movements or different ideas of justice. I wonder, as a scholar, especially wanting to interrogate ideas of power, and your position as a researcher within activism and in acting for change, what are some of the methods, like reflexive methods and ways that you go about doing that to really not only to satisfy your own ideas of am I trying to be as equal as possible, but also to gain that kind of feedback from the populations in which we're working with?
Absolutely. I mean, I think reflexivity has to be integrated into every step of the way. We have it formally. We have, when I first started this work, the practice that we did in a more formal way was what we call testimonio, right? Which is this notion of people sort of not just giving a testimonial, but really something that is speaking your truth into a space where you know that it's going to be heard in such a way that you can speak your truth. So we try to create those spaces where people talk about what's happening to them right now, and it's part of it is just building up a trust. For me personally, it was about well, one thing is I was working in a particular neighborhood, so that kind of gave me that space of trying to build up that trust. And I went in there thinking I'm African American. I grew up in a low-income rural neighborhood. Youngest of 13. I mean, I felt like I had. And that my kids, I mean, the youth hate for when I say stuff like this. I thought I had street cred, okay? And it was like, no, You are the man. You're the man. I mean, I'm coming from UNC Chapel Hill. And so, so it was, for me, it's been about just listening and showing up and being in the space so that and starting from the places, what do we create together? And having it be more youth-led. I consider their parents my friends. I hang out with them. Some of the families have, and this is one thing I didn't mention, that the community has transitioned. Several of the families that I've worked with, it's turning more into, there are a lot of new immigrants who are living in the family. A lot of the African-American families have transitioned out there into the rural areas. George went with me at lunchtime on a little field trip over to the teen center, and there's some youth, because I've been working, we have workshops on Saturdays, and so I go out to Chatham County to get 3 of the youth that used to live right next door, like 5 minutes away, but now they're in Chatham County. I go up there and pick them up. I'm way over your question that you asked, but this is what it's about building trust and creating a space. So the reflexivity may be in the car when we're driving from Chatham County. It can be sitting on the stoop when I'm talking to their moms.
Yeah, I'd like to address this question too. I think your presentation and this work is really wonderful. I've also learned some things. I mean, I come to the term activist research really with a healthy dose of skepticism, right? For a couple of reasons, none of which you have exhibited. My cautions are unrelated to what you said. But one is the problem of opportunism. You don't want to research activists as a way of, or research people who are oppressed as a way of sort of making your career, or as a way of having something that you're writing about, right? And people that, when I was writing my book about the labor movement, I mean, I have to say that was a huge deal for people. And I got around this in a couple of ways. But the other caution is to, so one is not to take too much, and the other is not to give too much. Because who are we, really? I mean, I've learned so much more from activists. I knew nothing. I thought I knew the labor movement. I thought I knew history, I was an activist, whatever. And I start talking to rank and file workers in their union about what they want to do with their union, and I'm like blown away. And so all I have, after a time, a series of dialogues where I thought I would have insights to offer, but a lot more listening. And then the other thing, and knowing that I was not one of them, although I became sort of family. I mean, I was never a coworker, but family. And the other thing was about thinking about ways, because I think getting people's voices in places where they didn't have voice before is something to do. And so I co-wrote a chapter of my book with one of the workers over something that we disagreed about, because I couldn't think of an ethical way for me to give advice to a movement where these people are struggling, for their lives. And here I am trying to give some advice. So, and the other thing is that I donated my archive to the labor archive, so that people will have access to those voices for a long time. And of course, the book comes out, and so their voices are read and heard. I got the weirdest phone call. Is this okay? Like, a guy called me and said, "I think your book will make an excellent movie. Call me. I'm a film producer in Hollywood." And I'm just like, what? I'm really suspicious. Again, this question. I mean, you don't want to take too much, don't want to give too much. And is the research itself the activism? I mean, or are we studying activists, right? So these are questions that I have in my head.